Hello, I'm Tracy Nicholas, and welcome to Folkloring. I am a passionate folklore practitioner, and to me, folkloring is more than just a podcast. It's my commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Folkloring. And today I am here with Kathryn Eipl, who is a Reiki Master, a sound therapist, a yoga and meditation guide, and the founder of Eipl Healing. And we are going to talk about what she does, talk about some of the stories that support a healthy practice of yoga and of sound healing. So, welcome, Kathryn. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about what it is that I do.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear all about it. But before we start, have you been folkloring lately? And if so, how?
Yes, I have. One of the things that I've been doing more regularly every single day is I'm at least pulling one tarot card. But really, how can you just pull one? So it ends up being at least three, sometimes seven.
Yeah, whatever moves you in that moment.
Exactly.
Well, I'll call you and raise you one. I have been pulling my cards lately too, and I typically pull oracle cards, and there's a particular deck I like very much.
hmm
But a few days ago, maybe a week ago, I was like, I just want to start pulling some of my goddess cards. And so I have two goddess decks, and one is just like, goddess oracle cards, and the other is dark goddesses.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really a fun deck. And so I've been pulling a few cards from each of those every day and sort of seeing what, the pretty happy love and light goddesses are saying, then what the dark goddesses are telling me. So that's what I've been doing lately.
Is there like an overlap between the two, do you find?
Uh, I haven't, off the top of my head, I can't think of a dark goddess that's also in the goddess deck. But I find that having done some research on dark goddesses, which I'm fascinated with, it's not as much that they're evil or bad. It's more like sort of the fae, right? Like they have a different set of rules and
Rules. hmm
values, right? And so when a goddess is associated with things like death or war or that kind of thing, it can be a bad thing, right? It can mean
hmm
destruction, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is evil in any way. It's just more ambiguous, I guess I want to say. So I find that there are really positive qualities to all of the dark goddesses. And interestingly, some will be like associated with death and childbirth, and so you get the opposite
Yeah.
ends of the spectrum. So certainly any dark goddess that you can bring up, I can say here are, the light aspects. So there's crossover in that way.
Yeah, and that's more of where my question was, is like if you've noticed that in the messages with the light goddesses, if it like correlates a little bit with the ones that you also see from the dark goddesses. Because it's Kali, I think, is one that most people can associate as like a dark goddess, because she's the goddess of death and destruction, and she's feared, and but at the same time she also brings rebirth and transformation.
Right.
So then that is very beautiful and powerful in itself.
Well, even when you're looking at the tarot, people are like, oh, death or oh, the tower. It's like, those are not,
Terrible.
yeah, those are not bad cards. Those cards are just, and again, even if it's destruction, right? Like you said, it's that rebirth and rebuilding. And I think
hmm
that if we look even to like just randomly off the top of my head, if we look to like the wheel of the year, that cycle keeps happening. And it's the cycle of life, right? Because, we don't have that rebirth unless there is that, destruction, the ending of the old and the beginning of the new. So I think it's just such a great metaphor for who we are. And so when people are looking at it, again, any divination system is our interpretation, right?
Right.
So I tend to interpret the dark goddess cards for myself, and I tend to tie them to like things I know I shouldn't be doing, or
mm
if I'm
hmm
procrastinating on something, and so I think of those things that I'm not happy with. about like my current situation when I'm pulling the Dark Goddess cards, much more so than the other ones. So I think that that's just really me that is making those sort of darker connections.
Nice. Yeah, that's what I do when I've been pulling tarot because I got a new deck recently. One of my friends gifted me a deck, so I've been working with it every single day to get really familiar with it because the artwork is different than the standard, Rider-Waite tarot that everybody is familiar with. And so when the darker cards come out, I'm like, "Oh, well, yeah, I have been like eating more like not as many vegetables and I haven't been like diligent on my morning practice and stretches. So okay, like I need to do those things. I get it.
I learned a really interesting way of reading tarot over this past summer. And I've never been super into tarot, mostly because I feel like it's, very strict interpretations in a lot of ways. And this was a bunch of us who were sitting around a table and everybody pulled a card. And then we sort of passed each card around and said, "What message do you see in this card?" And it was really an interpretation of the artwork and what each of us, how we each connected to that artwork. So to be getting a deck like you have that is different artwork, I would be really interested to see if you're looking at those and saying, hey, this art speaks to me in a particular way, or this particular card and these images speak to me in a way that I wouldn't normally say, oh, this is the three of pentacles, right?
hmm And that I've been doing a similar practice is with this deck, I will pull a card and I'll sit and I'll look at the artwork and see what feelings it brings up and how it just makes me feel. Because some cards I'll pick up, I'm like, ooh, like this looks good. It's like uplifting. There are lots of like bright blues and yellows. And then there are cards where, what is this? I think it's the Nine of Wands, which in the general deck, it doesn't have like a dark or negative feeling to it, but with this deck, it is really dark. Like it's all black and white, and it just feels kind of ominous. So when I pulled it, I was like, oh. And then I looked at the book, and it's like illusion, deception. I'm like, yeah, that is what I feel.
Well, okay, well, great. So that gives people an idea for their own folkloring that if they want to start working with a deck, just look at it and see how you feel when you're studying it and what it brings up for you. So thank you for sharing that. That was a great discussion you led us down.
You're welcome.
So let's talk about you and the work that you do. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this kind of work and what the work is and what people experience when they're working with you?
Of course. So I'll try to keep this short because how I got into the work is kind of a little bit by accident. I was working as a production manager in themed entertainment. So think theme parks, live events, attractions, both in the US and internationally. So it's a lot of logistics, coordinating, schedules are constantly changing, and I am just someone who really likes to prove myself. So as I would work on a project, I would get another project and do my best to knock it out of the park. And entertainment, it can sometimes be a very thankless industry where you just work so hard and people know that you're doing your job, but unless you fuck up, people don't realize the impact of your job,
Right.
right? So if you're doing everything well, people don't really necessarily notice because they're like, oh, everything's on time, everything's working out, magic. And so I just got to a spot where I realized my heart wasn't in it. It wasn't something that I was fully passionate about. And it was a really hard a moment to face because I had spent pretty much my whole life up to that point working towards that job, that career. and feeling like I was a failure when I realized, oh, I actually changed my mind. This is not what I want to do. So I got really depressed and I didn't know what to do. I was in and out of therapy. I was seeking counseling and I just decided I was like something in my life has to change. Like I have to make a change because like the things I'm doing with therapy clearly not helping me advance at the speed and caliber that I want. So I was like, well, what do I enjoy doing? I'm like, I remember when I was doing yoga twice a week, that was like the happiest I'd been in my life.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
let me get back to my yoga practice. So I found uh, a locally owned, woman-run yoga studio, like in my neighborhood, and I just started going regularly. And that helped my mood, like, improve. And it also allowed me to confront some emotions that I had buried down, deep down, and I didn't realize it. And then it got to the point where I was like, it's really hard to keep going to a yoga class when my schedule is changing so much because I can't reliably say I'll go in the morning or I'll go at night. Like I can't leave during the middle of the day. I don't have that luxury. So then I was looking for teacher trainings. All of them required traveling or taking a month off to like immerse yourself in this. And I'm like, again, I can't do this. I was like, can there be something on the weekends? Like, even if it takes like multiple months, like, I don't care if it's like half a year, whatever. I just need I want to get certified so that way I know how to do yoga with proper alignment. I can listen to my body. So it was strictly for me that I wanted to get a yoga teacher training education. I had no desire to teach it. And then the studio that I was going to actually started offering their first ever yoga teacher training. And I was like, there, I'm done. As it was on the weekends, it went for 5 months. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm gonna do this. And through that, that's when I got exposed to Reiki and sound therapy.
Hmm.
And it was to the point where everyone was interested in learning sound healing and how to work with the crystal bowls. So the teacher actually incorporated that into our teacher training. And from there, so one of the things I didn't mention when I got depressed, one of the band-aids that I decided to do was to drink more and smoke more weed, because, you know,
That's what people do.
a healthy way to numb your feelings.
Right.
Uh, which if you're listening, it's not healthy, and that's my sarcasm. So, yeah, and what I found is once we did the certification, we and passed the test, the teacher let us teach at the studio if we wanted to. And with that came access to the singing bowls. And that was actually what got me out of my addiction because instead of driving to a bar or driving to go meet up with friends where I knew the main activity would be drinking, I would leave my house and drive to the studio when no one was in it and play the crystal bowls in the studio and record myself for hours. And little did I know that it has been studied that learning an instrument often helps people in recovery because it
Really?
gives them something else to do.
Sure.
And it also helps trigger the dopamine release, which is what you're seeking when you're seeking any substance. So once I learned that, I was like, it makes sense. Like, because people would be like, well, how did you stop your addictions? I'm like, honestly, sound healing.
That's really interesting because, so many times when people are talking about, like, oh, you have to raise your vibration, and it's scorned. People say, oh, come on, all that woo-woo stuff. But then you start to really look at it, and there is, scientific fact behind a lot of that talk about our vibrations. And so when we didn't have the science behind it, and it was just people like talking about this because in their lived experience they saw changes like you did. So then those are like just air quotes stories. So when we talk about those things and they're treated like they're not real, or they're just some sort of made up thing that people are talking about, and then later we see that there is science behind that, and being there with those bowls. And I've have singing bowls, but all of mine are metal. I have never tried
Hmm.
the crystal ones, but I have had like sound therapy and sound healing. I've done gong baths, and it's all lovely. And yeah, you can absolutely see where, number one, why experiencing that and not numbing yourself anymore is going to bring up these emotions so you can actually deal with them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's a lot of what we do in life. Even when you're looking back at stories and folklore, we are trying to work our way through these things that we feel, and being able to say, I sat down instead of with a drink in my hand, I sat down with a bowl in my hand, and I experienced that. And that's what it took you to work through it. And I think that the more we talk about stuff like this, the easier it is for people to say, hey, maybe that's something that would be useful because I know there's a real reason behind it.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I will say, like, I hated my absolute first sound healing. I hated it. It was uncomfortable. And I was sitting there the entire time, well, laying down, thinking, like, wow, this is an hour of my life I'm never gonna get back. Like, I could have stayed in the office. I could have sent so many emails by now. Like, I could have gotten ahead on my day for tomorrow, but instead, I left work a little bit early to come here to be uncomfortable, and these sounds are supposed to make me relaxed. So, and I say that because if you've never experienced sound healing before, and the first time you go in it, it might be uncomfortable because one, it's like if you haven't worked out in a super long time and then you're like, I'm gonna go lift weights for an hour, your body's gonna be so achy, so sore, and you're not gonna be able to get the proper benefits because you're wearing your body out without building up the muscle first. So that's what sound healing is. It kind of like meditation. It's an exercise. It's a muscle that you're training your body to be comfortable with.
Mhm.
So if you go to your first one and you hate it, give it another shot. Like I absolutely loved my second one, and now here I am.
I think too that we're so very used to just like running from one thing to the next. And oh, I got to do this. I got to send that email. I got to, and people are just so used to that. And that's another way I think that we cope with managing our emotions. It's very difficult for people to just stop and take it easy. And like you said, in your brain, you were like, oh, I should have done this thing. Oh, I could have, oh, so and so is waiting for an answer from me. And so you weren't really experiencing it. You were experiencing your brain saying, no, 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 we're not doing this thing. We're just going to think
Yeah.
and think and think and think. Those are stories that we tell ourselves. If you are so important that you can't leave work because you have to send these 10 more emails and you can't go and take care of yourself, that's a story, right? Just like all the other stories we tell ourselves. And I find that you can't do what you don't believe in, right?
Absolutely.
If you think something is not possible, and I know people who are so committed to not being able to meditate, and it's hilarious. It's like, okay, don't try. And because it does. It's a practice that is hard to do. And I really struggled, and I always had, monkey brain, and I couldn't focus, and I would get distracted. And then I started reading other practices of like, well, try walking meditation, right?
Hmm.
And, listen to focus on what's around you. And I think that that is, and still to this day, I would say that's one of my folkloring practices is that if I'm going to go for a walk, I want to listen to what's happening around me.
Yeah.
And if I'm listening to like a podcast, like, oh, I need to catch up on my podcast because like somebody cares about whether or not I'm caught up on my podcasts. And yes, as a podcaster, I too am behind on listening to podcasts. But I find that if it's just quiet, and I live in a residential neighborhood, so it's not many people are around during the day, and so often I wouldn't see anybody else. And just listening to the birds and the squirrels and the animals, and it's such a different way. And so once I was able to do that and sort of slow down in that way while my body was moving, then I found that it got easier for me to just meditate, lying down on my couch. Although I will say I listen to binaural beats.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Mhm.
those really help me focus. But yeah, there are people who are so committed to not being able to take this like calming practice. And yeah, it's just stories, right?
Yeah, and it's just stories, and it's also like, okay, well, what if you approach it from the premise that it is similar to working out physically, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you need to train your mind and your body to get used to meditating, and there's like you were sharing, there's more than one way to meditate. As what I find often is the people who tell me that they don't like meditating or that they can't do it are the people who believe that your mind has to be blank
Right.
like while you're meditating, you're not thinking about anything. You're just in the abyss. And I'm like, that is a possibility with meditation,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that that's the only way to meditate. You can do a walking meditation. You can go out in nature and just sit and look at the wind and how it affects the trees. Like that's
Hmm.
another form of meditation. Another type of meditation, you can light a candle and stare at the flame
Hmm.
and just watch the candle burn. So there's so many different ways to meditate. And that's one of the things that yoga actually helps prepare you to do is to be able to meditate in and reach that quieting the monkey mind,
Hmm.
would you say?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that it, I, I don't remember where I heard this, but it's like if you don't think that you have any time to meditate, take 15 minutes and meditate. And if you don't have 15 minutes to meditate, take 30 minutes and meditate.
yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah. And I think that when people are moving fast, and again, these are the stories that we want to believe about ourselves, right? Because if you can go and be, what to you at that point was not productive, and you can go take an hour and be not productive, well, maybe people realize that you don't matter as much, and maybe they won't hire you the next time. And so we build these fears up. And again, being busy is just another kind of addiction, right?
Absolutely. That's something that I also work with. So I'm an emotional support coach as well, and I work with people to one, just start identifying their emotions and then where do they live in their body? Like a lot of times if we feel anger or anxiety, there's a body part in us that is signaling us. Like for me, when I'm feeling anxious, like I usually get like a stomach ache or my stomach feels a little queasy and I'm like, I'm not going to eat today because I don't know what's going to happen if I do, right? So it's identifying that and then also learning how to work and express those emotions so that they're
Mhm.
not running the show or that we're not running from them and numbing them with trying to be busy because that is, like you were saying, that is a way to numb out. It's kind of a trauma response in a way because we're like, well, if I'm busy and if I'm productive, at least I know I'm doing something. And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay, but meditating and also getting in touch with your emotions is being productive and it is doing something.
And I think it also depends on how you define emotions. I used to have a lot of anxiety, some of which were caused by physical reactions my body was having to stuff that I was eating that I had sensitivities to. And once I figured out, well, I'm not really anxious. Like when I didn't know what the problem was, I was like, why am I so anxious? I should worry about money, or I should worry about, this relationship, or I should. And so I would assign that anxiety to something because I knew I was worried. I knew I was anxious. So of course I had to be anxious about something, right? And once I realized I didn't have to do that, I was like, okay, well, this isn't that bad. It's a feeling. I'm having this feeling. And then I thought to myself, anxiety and excitement are so close physically to each other. And for me, what it occurred to me was that anxiety is the same feeling as excitement, but anxiety is sinking and excitement is rising. And I,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that just clicked in my brain. So yeah, it's like what stories do we tell ourselves about emotions that we feel? And, frankly, like a little bit of stage fright for me is one of my favorite emotions. I love it. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody hates it, right? And I realize how weird I am on this topic, but I love it because it is the only feeling that I can think of off the top of my head that can't be manufactured, right?
Mm.
You can watch a movie and suddenly you're crying, right? Something terrible
Right.
happens, or you can laugh, or you can feel that excitement of watching people fall in love and be empathetic to that and feel those feelings. And even when it's like somebody's like going up on stage and they're scared, we feel like, oh, come on, don't feel that way. Like we want to be there and help them. We don't feel that feeling. Like when we're
Right.
in it is the only time we really feel it. And so to me, it's a really precious emotion because it comes from something that you've challenged yourself to do.
Yeah. I enjoy that feeling because I describe that feeling as nervous excitement. So it's like the right amount of nervous where I am excited, and that means that whatever I am doing is what I'm drawn to do. It is something that I want to be doing. And so I know however it goes is going to be great because I truly care and I care about it. So I'm not going to let it be bad, right? And then that like nervousness drives me, it motivates me to deliver something of good quality.
Well, and then you look at the story of that nervousness too. It's saying, oh, these people are going to judge me. I'm going to say something dumb. I'm going to, forget
Mm-hmm.
what I'm supposed to be saying. And having worked in theater for over a decade, I have definitely had the actor's nightmare, which is when you are suddenly finding yourself on stage in front of an audience and you've never rehearsed and you don't know what's going on or where you're supposed to be. I have had that. I've also had the taking a test and not having studied for it or even knowing or haven't even
Oh, yeah.
gone to class, right? And I think that when people get very upset about having to get up in front of people, they imagine that people are judging them as harshly as they're judging themselves. And I think that it's so interesting because you've got a bunch of people in a room, right? They have taken their time, possibly their money, their energy, they've gotten there, they're sitting down and they're about to give you an hour of their time or half hour, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want you to succeed. They want it
Yeah.
really, really bad. And they don't want to have that feeling of like, oh, that's so bad that they feel so terrible, right? Like that's a room full of, hundreds of friends of yours, right? And they're rooting for you. And yet we tell
Yeah.
ourselves the opposite story. Like I'm going to feel
Mm-hmm.
so stupid. I'm going to look stupid. Everyone's going to think I'm dumb. Again, this is why I think stories are important because it's even our own personal stories that we tell that allow our emotions to rule us because of things that we don't want instead of, in your case, things you do want. That excitement, that nervous anticipation, right?
Yeah. And I can relate to that theater story. I've been there too. And as, a stage manager, I have been put into an actor role too many times because an actor was sick or something.
Right.
And I'm like, great, we open in 2 days and I have zero lines memorized.
Yep.
And I was one of like the narrators.
Oh gosh.
So not only did I have to like do a lot of acting in the scenes, but we would also, it was me and a partner who would set up the scene.
Oh.
And I just remember like on opening night, because everyone was like, "You're gonna do great." I'm like, I feel like I'm gonna fail. But I just like ran off stage, like I said my last line, and I was like, I have no idea the order of lines that are supposed to come out in this next scene. And somebody was studying their own lines, and I just ripped the script out of their hands and was like reading my lines. And then I heard my cue, and I just threw it behind me and ran on stage. But everyone in the audience that came and talked to me, they're like, "You were the best part of the show." And I'm like, I had no idea what my lines were. You have no idea how many times my partner was mumbling what my next line was until I got it. Like, but
Yeah.
that's your point. Like people want you to succeed, right?
Right. And they don't know. They don't know what failure looks like in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had, like, the audience had no idea what your next line was. It didn't matter, you know?
Neither did I.
But you got through it and they believed it. And so in that case, I think that we get in our way so many times. And this, I guess, is leading us back to sort of the meditation and the yoga. And it is about ongoing practice because
Mm-hmm.
we've spent so many years telling ourselves these negative stories.
Right.
So we believe like I have to earn love, or I have to, nobody's gonna like me if I don't, I don't
Yeah.
know,
Or you're not complete if you're single, right? Like you need to be looking for your partner. And there are all these stories, and it's just what we choose to believe, right?
And a lot of these stories are based on older stories, right? We are brought up to believe that women need to be the helpless princess that needs saving, the distressed, and men are the heroes. And we're given these stories like they somehow reflect reality in any way, right? But they come from a time where, in a lot of ways, society was such that women weren't in a safe position if they weren't with a man, if they weren't married, if they weren't having kids, right?
Right.
And so when you look at those older stories and you see how they're still informing stories that we have today, because I will tell you right now, I know more people that are miserable in relationships than are miserable out of relationships. Right. And they stick with them because they're like, well, I don't want to be alone. And it's just, we culturally we're taught these stories, and so we believe them. And we're taught stories like we were talking earlier about, if you're busy, that means you're valuable, that means you get a seat at the table, you belong here. If you
Hmm.
are working yourself to the bone,
Yeah.
and we buy into that. People are out there working 50, 60, 70-hour weeks and feeling like, oh, everything would fall apart if I didn't do this. And it's like, well, maybe if you're working almost double a 40-hour week, things should fall apart without you doing it. Like maybe that's two people should be doing that job.
Right.
But people get really committed to that and like, oh, I'm trying so hard and I'm just another story that, you have to contribute to be part of the village, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that there is this dichotomy of productivity and feeling busy and constantly working means that you're valuable. And there's being resistance to people doing yoga because initially, what yoga was when it started back in the Vedic period, it was talked about as though that was a sacrifice because you were sacrificing your desire to have a normal life. So you were giving up like the materialistic things, and instead you were becoming dedicated to shedding different layers of yourself. And so that was kind of viewed as that sacrifice.
Interesting. Now, I had never heard that. That's really fascinating because when you think about people going off on retreat, right?
Hmm.
And they go off and they're silent for a week or a month or however long they go for. And that's part of how they are not running away from whatever their inner dialogue is. So I think that it was originally considered like I am offering the sacrifice of my time, my energy, my effort. And it's funny because I have not been currently doing yoga. I've been focused on lifting because I'm a little worried as I get older. I want to stay as strong as I can, although yoga would help with that. But I remember I was really seriously into it because I had had a terrible injury.
Hmm.
My ankle, I like ripped all the tendons off my ankle.
Wow.
Yeah, it was one of those you don't really want to impress the experts kind of injury. Um, and so it was really bad. I went to physical therapy for months, right? And they did what they could. When they first like got me in physical therapy, my ankle was completely frozen. Like I couldn't move my foot up or down.
Oh.
And so like for months, we worked on it and I was going in 3 times a week and I was
Hmm.
really, dedicated and everything. And by the time I got done, they're like, well, your ankle's kind of never going to be the same, right? And you're never going to have the range of movement that you will because this was such a terrible injury. And I was like, okay. And then what I decided to do at that point was, and I just had like a DVD. I was like, I'm gonna do some yoga because it's sort of similar to like some of the poses are similar to some of the exercises I was doing. And sure enough, I did it for months, and all of a sudden I was like, well, I do have the range of movement back, right?
Hmm.
And the thing about yoga that people are like, oh, these people they're so amazing at it and they do it all the time. It's like yoga is always hard because it gets harder. Like as you go up in levels and you get stronger, it gets harder.
Hmm.
And so it's always where you are. Like yoga always meets you where you are.
Yeah, and I had a very similar thing. I didn't have your the injury you had to your extent, but I played sports all throughout my childhood, teenage years, and I was of the mindset when I was a teenager that I was invincible. So every sports season, multiple times a year, I was spraining my wrists. And I would just wrap them, tape them, and then keep playing. I wouldn't take, I was like, don't put me on the bench. I want to play. And so then that gave me chronic pain.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I started doing yoga at the yoga studio that I trained at where I learned different modifications because I was like, I can't do downward dog, it hurts. And then the teacher was like, do it with blocks. That will help build the joints in your wrist back. So after doing that and doing other modifications for my wrists, like they no longer hurt.
Wow.
And that happened in maybe a couple of months of just consistently doing it. So, what I love about yoga is that it humbles you, right? Because you might think, oh, I can do this pose. And then you'll try it and you're like, that was a lot harder. Okay, what can my body do, right?
Right, right.
So, yoga has this way of like gently humbling you and then calling you back in to be like, no, check in with your body. Like, what feels good? Because yoga shouldn't hurt. Like, it should never hurt or feel like it's doing harm in your body. So it's really up to the person who's doing the yoga to have that body awareness and then to know when it's time to ease off. Because when yoga was at its very beginning stages in the East, it was more of a guru system. So it was one-on-one. You didn't have these group yoga classes happening until, like 1,000 years later, quite literally.
Was that more of a system where people who go and they're gonna go, I don't know, study meditation or they're gonna go off to study with the monks or whatever? Was it more of a spiritual kind of journey than what we think of it as today?
Yeah, so initially when it started, it was more meditation based and it didn't actually have okay, so there are two different stories on this. So what most people commonly believe is that yoga started in India. And so if you look at that, the way it was being taught in India is that it was the guru system and it was one-on-one and it was tailored to each student. And that was more meditation based. So you were learning more spiritual concepts. It was a lot of being still, sitting still. So some people believe that yoga started 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. And then some experts say that it started as far back as 10,000 years ago.
Wow.
And there have been hieroglyphics found in Egypt in some temple art that what it looks like are yoga poses. So at that school of thought, if it originated in Egypt first, then it was using physical movement. But if
Mhm.
it originated in India, or, they could have been happening at the same time, but just two ways of doing it, then the in India was practicing it more meditation based, whereas the Egyptians were using it more movement and, of course, with spiritual concepts.
Mhm.
So there is a type of yoga that is based off of what they found in the temple art, and that's called Kemetic yoga, but that didn't get branded as such until 1970. So even studying it under that is relatively new.
Got it.
It's really fascinating because when you go that far back in time, it can be hard to place a definitive, like, here's where it started. So there is a lot of texts that they have found from the Indus Valley, which the Indus Valley is in India, and that is considered one of the oldest urban cities in the world. So that's why a lot of people believe that it originated in India, just because that is older than ancient Egypt.
Right. It's interesting because when I think about archaeology and, we study a lot about how people lived, but it's like we get a lot of information about how did they cook and, how did they gather their food and did they have farming practices and what were their homes like? How did they keep warm? And all of the kinds of things that are important to us as humans because they keep us alive.
Right.
But we talk less, and of course, there are toys that are discovered and things like that, but we don't talk as much about sort of adult kind of how did they just spend their time, whether it's free time, whether it's, sometimes we know some social stuff, and a lot of that does come to us through folk practices that have continued on through time and look at some of those older traditions. But like, yeah, how did they spend their spiritual time? Well, we study temples and mosques
Hmm.
and churches and that kind of thing, and some holy sites that maybe they were doing some sort of rituals and stuff, but just like downtime. Were they, I don't know, were they out there just doing yoga and everybody did it, except for the people that were running away from their emotions back then, and so they were avoiding it? Or who knows? Was it for the ultra wealthy? Was it for people that walked away from like financial and they said, I'm going to be, I don't know what the equivalent of a monk or someone who's taken a vow of poverty would have been then.
Right.
And so it's hard to trace some of these practices back to, what was, I would be interested to hear what some of those original philosophies were, because I know that we focus a lot on the physical now, right?
Right.
And some on the spiritual. There's still a lot of that. I think people who are in your position who have studied it, but I know you were telling me that there are sort of 8 principles of yoga. And I like, to me, all I can name are those two things, like the physical focus. And if we're talking about like cooling down and you're in child's pose and you are meditating at the end or whatever it is, that's all I know. So I'd be
Right.
interested to hear what these other, like, what are the other main principles?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things is like in the West, we really just focus on the asanas. And the asana is the physical practice of yoga, which in Sanskrit it means seat or to sit. So the asana practice, once movement actually got added into yoga, was preparing you to be able to sit longer so that you could meditate longer and reach deeper states of meditation. So it wasn't until about 200 BC to 500 AD was when movement got added to yoga. And that period of time is known as classical yoga
Okay.
because that's where what we know yoga today comes from more. So then that's when they took in the asana practices, and that's also when they started working with the 8 limbs of yoga. So the 8 limbs, the first one is the yamas, which are attitudes that you should have towards your environment. And so they all have Sanskrit names, but I will keep it to the non-Sanskrit so everyone can kind of understand. There are five asanas. So one is nonviolence, honesty and truthfulness, non-stealing, the right use of energy and how to kind of conserve your energy, and also practice sexual restraint and not feeding into that sexual desire. And then non-greed and non-coveting. So those are the yamas. And then the second limb are the niyamas. And those are positive duties that you, the person, wants to embody. So, cleanliness, purity of mind and body, contentment, also seen as acceptance, and discipline, study, self reflection, and contemplation of the divine.
Hmm.
And then the third asana, or the third limb, is the asanas, which is the physical practice. It's posture, the movement. And then the fourth limb is pranayama, which is breath work, breathing techniques. So now that you have the posture and the movement, how can you add in breath and pair the two together? The fifth limb is pratyahara, which is withdrawing the senses. So you're leaving the external world out while you are practicing, and you're just going inward and focusing on your breath, your movement. You're not trying to fixate on, like, okay, well, like, what's happening over there? What am I hearing? Like, you're really going deep, you're going in. And then the sixth limb is Dhyana, and that's focused attention on a single thing. So a lot of times when you're in a yoga practice, you might hear the phrase focus on your drishti. Drishti is a spot that you want to focus on. So if you're in like a bouncing pose, say tree pose, and you feel wobbly, if you fixate on one point that's ahead of you, it will help your bounce because you're not trying to look everywhere. So when you're focused on one thing, you're able to do more with your body, with your mind.
Well, that kind of brings us back to what we were talking about earlier with meditating and people who think that they're going to just completely blank out their mind, but instead to focus on like one thing, one specific thing is that's what I go for, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
know I'm not going to just not have thoughts. And
Right.
so, and isn't that even when, people are chanting or they're, saying, oh,
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, like that one sound gives them that focus of a single thing. So that really makes a lot of sense with a tie-in to the meditation.
Right. And I love that you brought it up right then because the seventh limb is actually meditation.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's dhanayana, which is meditation, or when you're starting to get closer to that. Uh, I don't want to say blank mind, but you're better at quieting out the mind chatter that's going on. You're not thinking about your to-do list. And then the eighth limb samadhi, which is bliss or enlightenment. So the purpose of your yoga practice was to reach that bliss enlightenment state. And that one's a hard one to achieve. That's why people would devote their lives to yoga. And then that's where the essence of, in a sense, suffering comes from with a yoga practice. But it's interesting because you're also doing yoga to not escape, but to release the
Hmm.
feeling of suffering as well.
Hmm. So are there, as you're getting deeper into your study that you did, are there stories that go along with these different, you called them limbs?
Yeah.
Are there like, because a lot of times we see folklore that kind of supports what we want people to do, right? There, like if there is a pond near your village that is dangerous because it's got a lot of plant life and people drowned in there, then you start to see stories crop up about there being a monster in that. Is there anything similar with these belief systems with yoga? Because, and the reason I'm asking, and I might be totally like out in left field here, but I think about all the different names of poses. And again, being from a very Western kind of background, and that's really what I know about yoga. And a lot of them are like, okay, that's what that looks like,
Hmm.
downward dog. Like you know why they call downward dog, right? And why they call a tree pose. But I'm wondering if there are other stories of like when people first discovered some of these poses or some of these different principles. Were there stories that ever grew out of these practices?
There are several different stories and myths that come from yoga practices. Like, there are a couple of stories about, I can't remember the name, but there was a teacher who was said to have reached samadhi and just like vanished.
Oh, wow.
So, because he had reached the bliss and enlightenment state that the story goes, his body dissolved and just
Wow.
left the earth because he was so enlightened. It He didn't actually die, he just disintegrated and became one with the universe in a new way.
And I thought you just had to be a woman of a certain age to completely disappear.
No. And when yoga started, it was actually a men's practice.
Okay.
Women didn't start doing it until uh, closer to the classical time, I believe. It might have been even, yeah, it was around that time because from there, then we move into Tantra yoga and then Ashtanga.
Let me guess. So before that, when it was just a men's practice, it was somehow bad for our wombs. Maybe. I'm just speculating on that.
Yeah, that I don't know. But I think it was again along the lines of because yoga is a practice where you were letting go of the other earthly pleasures and material things, that women were seen more valuable as staying a part of the
Right.
society because
Right.
you can give birth and raise a child. And if you're raising a child, you can't just go up to the mountaintop and sequester yourself for months at a time because women are needed to take care of their kids, their family.
And also, like, if you've got a bunch of women up there, there's a bunch of dudes that you know are going to be tempted, right? So it just wouldn't have been practical.
Hmm. Exactly. And that could be why there is the yama where you are practicing sexual restraint, right? Because you're learning how to harness that sexual energy in a different way and not feeding into that urge, that desire.
Interesting. Well, this has been really fascinating. I really appreciate getting into these stories because there's a lot of stuff I didn't know. And just hearing about kind of where yoga comes from and how it ties to meditation, just really fascinating stuff. I appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the space to share it. I like talking about this stuff, and it's something that a lot of people, especially here in the West, in America, we don't really know because what we know as
Mhm.
yoga is the physical practice, but it's so much deeper. There's a philosophy to it. There are different uh, limbs that we need to take into account with the practice because in order to be the people that dedicated their lives to yoga, that's what is called a yogini or a yogi, right? So for someone in the West to say, "Oh, I'm a yogini," meaning that they go to yoga classes, that's
Right.
not actually true to the term. So,
And isn't that like at the very heart of cultural appropriation, of taking something out of a cultural context and, taking on sort of the trappings and mantle of that practice or whatever it is, and saying, oh, well, now I am, a yogi or
mhm.
whatever you're gonna claim, without doing the work and understanding. And I'm not saying people from different cultures can't practice various things, because I think ultimately we all came from the same general place. But I'm saying when you start to understand the cultural context of yoga and what people were originally like, why they were doing it and what they were trying to achieve with it, it becomes such a very different thing
Mhm.
than, oh, well, I've got my cute little yoga outfit and I'm going to go and be fit and then go drink my smoothie afterwards. And that's just like a whole different thing of, it's like putting on yoga as a costume instead of really understanding what it was. And I'm not saying you have to go, give your life to yoga,
No.
but to understand the bigger picture of what it's about, I think helps for a more informed and deeper practice, right?
Absolutely. I agree with that sentiment because I think it's important that whenever you adapt to or start doing something that you know originated in a different culture, it's important to give yourself the education of
Right.
where did it come from? When and how did it get started? And that was something that I really wanted to learn as part of when I decided to go into a yoga teacher training. I didn't just want to learn the movements because I knew there was a deeper practice to it. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that entailed. And I didn't claim to know. I wanted someone to be able to teach me that. And so I do think it is important that if you are wanting to get serious in a yoga practice, or if you are very serious and diligent in your asana physical practice, take some time, explore the other areas. A good place to start is reading Patanjali's Yoga Sutra book. It's about tw 200 statements that he Patanjali was a yoga teacher and guide, and so his students actually would write down some of the things that he would say in their teachings.
Oh,
And so then
cool.
that's what's created the Patanjali Sutras. And it's a book that's often used in yoga teacher trainings. And there are four different parts. The first two parts are more practical, and then the second two parts, they go a little bit deeper into some like s spirituality concepts. So those two kind of get left out of a lot of teacher trainings. And so the teacher
Okay.
training I did was like very adamant that we read the whole book. And I reread it periodically. Like I'll pick it up like every 2, 3 years and just reread it because you get more information from it. Like it's initially just like one or two sentences, and then depending on the edition you have, goes into more context of what was meant. And then you can think about it and just like connect with yourself of like how does that make you feel? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Like what what would it take if you tried that for a day? How would your life be different?
So I guess the folkloring lesson here is get into the whole practice, not just the exercise part of it, the physical part of it, and yeah, do your research so you can have that deeper practice. Now, before we wrap up, do you have any other final thoughts that you want to share with listeners?
Oh, um, well, one, thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone here, and I appreciate you, Tracy, for inviting me onto your podcast. And so then I do want to just end with a quote from Nicholas Tesla, where he said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration."
That's a great one.
I know, I love that one.
Well, thank you for taking the time. This has been really fascinating. I'm glad to have learned more about it, and now you're making me want to pick back up my practice. So at least you've got one convert.
Yay, success!
As always, thank you for listening to Folkloring. If you have any questions or comments or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Blue Sky, Facebook, or Instagram. Other places you can find me are at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent, or creating folklore-inspired games at madmenandheroes.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep the traditions alive. And I hope that wherever you are, folklore is making your life more magical.